Welcome, dear listener, to this calming exploration of history designed to help you unwind and drift off to a peaceful slumber. Before we begin our story, I'd love to know where in the world you're joining us from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and say hello. And if you enjoy relaxing tales of times gone by, I invite you to subscribe for more soothing stories like this. Now make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and let your mind wander back to a bygone era known as the Renaissance. Spanning the 14th to 17th centuries, this period is often romanticized as a golden age of art, culture, and progress that brought Europe out of the Middle Ages and into the modern world. Names like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Shakespeare conjure images of soaring creativity and enlightened thinking. But what was life really like for the average person during this much exalted epoch? Behind the glittering facade of the Renaissance, the stark reality for most was an existence that was nasty, brutish and short, to borrow the famous words of philosopher Thomas Hobbes. While a privileged few patronized the fine arts and pondered the mysteries of science, the vast majority toiled in wretched squalor, facing threats ranging from deadly plagues to religious persecution to the constant spectre of war. In this episode, we'll peek behind the curtain of history and examine the darker, dirtier, and more dangerous aspects of Renaissance life that are too often airbrushed out of the picture. We'll see that the remarkable cultural and intellectual achievements of this period were in many ways made possible by the thankless sacrifices of the countless commoners whose names have been lost to history. So get settled in as we embark on an unflinching journey into an age that, for all its wonders, could also be a living nightmare. Imagine yourself walking down a narrow, crooked street in Renaissance London. The year is 1590, and you are a common labourer living in the teeming tenements of the city's poorer quarters. As you step out your door, the first thing that hits you is the stench. There is no sewage system, so chamber pots are simply emptied out of windows into the gutters below. Animal dung, rotting garbage, and even human corpses are left to fester in the streets. Rats and flies spread disease unimpeded, and potable water is scarce. As you begin your long workday, you pass by the scenes of wretchedness that are commonplace in your neighbourhood. Beggars with open sores and missing limbs plead for alms, while orphaned children with bloated bellies wail from hunger. You avert your eyes and hurry along, knowing that their fate could easily be your own if injury or illness prevented you from earning your daily bread. For the poor, there is no social safety net, and even a minor misfortune can lead to utter destitution. Your destination is one of the many construction sites where London's rapid growth is being carried out on the backs of men like you. The hours are long, the labour is backbreaking, and the pay is a pittance. Hauling heavy loads of bricks and mortar, you feel a twinge in your abdomen and realise that you're developing a hernia from the constant strain. You know that if it worsens, you could be incapacitated and cast out on the street with no means of support. As the sun rises higher, the heat becomes oppressive, and you long for a drink of clean water. But the well has run dry, and the only liquid at hand is the foul, greenish ale provided by your employer. You have no choice but to gulp it down and try to ignore the burning in your gut. Dysentery is rife in the city, and you've seen scores of your fellow workers fall ill with the bloody flux. If the contagion takes hold of you, your only recourse will be the quackery of the barber surgeons, whose favourite cure is to drain your excess humours with primitive bloodletting. Finally, the sun begins to set, and your long day of toil comes to an end. As you wearily make your way home, you pass the towering facade of St. Paul's Cathedral, where the great architect Inigo Jones is overseeing a grand renovation. For a moment you marvel at its beauty, but then reality sets in. you know that a single carved stone in that edifice costs more than you'll earn in a lifetime, and that its splendor is not meant for the likes of you. At last, you come to your squalid lodgings and collapse onto your flea-ridden straw mattress. The room is packed with other laborers and their families, and the close quarters are a breeding ground for disease. As you drift off to a fitful sleep, you say a silent prayer that you'll be spared the ravages of the pox or the plague for one more day. It's a prayer that has become all too routine. Such was the lot of the common man in Renaissance England, and indeed throughout much of Europe in this turbulent age. While the extraordinary achievements of the era's luminaries may have laid the groundwork for a brighter future, that future was still centuries away for the multitudes mired in misery. Nowhere was the vast gulf between the haves and have-nots more apparent than in the opulent palace of the Medici family in Florence. The Medicis were the quintessential Renaissance dynasty, rising from humble origins as textile merchants to become the wealthiest and most powerful clan in Europe through a combination of a business savvy, political cunning, and sheer ruthlessness. They turned Florence into the cultural capital of the continent and themselves into living legends. But the true source of the Medici's fabulous riches was not their patronage of the arts or their mastery of statecraft. It was quite simply the exploitation of the masses. The family's fortune was built on the back of the Florentine wool trade, which employed thousands of low-paid workers in crowded, dangerous factories. The Medicis also profited handsomely from the high taxes and rents they extracted from the city's impoverished underclass. While the likes of Cosimo and Lorenzo de' Medici basked in the splendor of their villas and gardens, adorning themselves with silks and jewels, and surrounding themselves with the greatest artists and thinkers of the age, the average Florentine struggled just to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. The lavish banquets and balls thrown by the Medicis, where guests dined on exotic delicacies and danced to the music of world-class orchestras, stood in stark contrast to the meagre rations and grinding labor that were the lot of the common folk. One telling example of the Medici's excess came in 1471, when Lorenzo the Magnificent held a jousting tournament to celebrate his marriage. The event was a dazzling spectacle of wealth and pageantry, with richly caparisoned horses, glittering armor, and a who's who of Italian nobility in attendance. But the real jaw-dropper was the prize Lorenzo offered to the winner, a statue of Mars crafted by none other than Andrea del Verrocchio, the master sculptor who had trained the young Leonardo da Vinci. The fact that Lorenzo could so casually give away a priceless work of art as a tournament trinket speaks volumes about the vast chasm between the Renaissance elite and everyone else. For the Medicis and their ilk, art was little more than a status symbol, a way to flaunt their wealth and sophistication. But for the artisans and craftsmen who actually created these masterpieces, art was a means of putting food on the table. The idea that a sculpture they had poured their heart and soul into could be so blithely discarded by a bored aristocrat must have been galling. But the Medici's callousness towards the lower classes extended far beyond their artistic pretensions. In 1478, the family was targeted by the Pazzi conspiracy, a plot by rival bankers to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano. The conspirators struck during Easter Mass at the cathedral, stabbing Giuliano to death, but only wounding Lorenzo. In the aftermath, the enraged Medicis unleashed a reign of terror on the city, executing or exiling hundreds of their enemies and consolidating their grip on power. For the average Florentine, caught in the crossfire of this vicious feud, the message was clear. In the cutthroat world of Renaissance politics, their lives were utterly expendable. The great game of power played by the Medicis and their rivals was a deadly serious business, and woe betide anyone who got in the way. So while we may marvel at the artistic and intellectual ferment of Renaissance Florence, it's important to remember that this golden age was built on a foundation of exploitation and indifference to human suffering. The soaring beauty of the Duomo and the Palazzo Vecchio, the breathtaking canvases of Botticelli and Michelangelo, the revolutionary ideas of Galileo and Machiavelli, all of these wonders were made possible by the backbreaking labour and destitution of the faceless masses. As we continue our journey through the dark underbelly of the Renaissance, we turn our attention to one of the most feared and reviled groups of the era, the mercenaries. These professional soldiers of fortune were a ubiquitous presence in the patchwork of city-states and principalities that made up Italy and much of Europe, offering their services to the highest bidder and switching sides at the drop of a hat. For the rulers and elites who employed them, mercenaries were a necessary evil, a way to project power and defend their interests without the expense and hassle of maintaining a standing army. But for the common people, mercenaries were a scourge, a horde of heavily armed thugs who roamed the countryside, pillaging and plundering at will. One of the most notorious mercenary captains of the Renaissance was a man named Francesco Busoni da Carmagnola. Born into poverty in the Piedmont region of Italy, Carmagnola rose through the ranks of the condottieri, mercenary companies, by dint of his cunning and brutality. He fought for a succession of masters, including the Visconti Dukes of Milan and the Republic of Venice, amassing a huge fortune along the way. But Carmagnola's loyalty was always for sale to the highest bidder, and in 1426 he betrayed his Venetian employers by defecting to their enemy, the Duke of Milan. For the next 5 years, he led Milanese armies in a series of devastating raids on Venetian territory, burning crops, looting villages, and leaving a trail of misery in his wake. The impact of Carmagnola's depredations on the ordinary people caught in the middle was incalculable. Farmers saw their livelihoods go up in smoke as their fields were torched and their livestock slaughtered. Artisans and labourers were press-ganged into building fortifications and supplying the mercenary horde. Women and children were subjected to unspeakable atrocities at the hands of the rampaging soldiers. And yet, despite the havoc he wreaked, Carmagnola was hailed as a hero by the Milanese, who showered him with honours and wealth. His treachery against Venice was seen as a masterstroke of realpolitik, a triumph of Machiavellian cunning over naive idealism. It was a stark reminder that, in the dog-eat-dog world of Renaissance Italy, might made right